Okay, so we've been discussing the halachic attitude of the conservative movement based on two sources. One of them, a compilation about the whole attitude towards non-Orthodox denominations by Rav Ronen Lubitz, that I actually kind of proofread or read it before it was published and made a few comments that may have been put in this little booklet. And the other one is something written by Rabbi David Golinkin himself about the attitude of the Masorti movement to halacha. I have to say I found some significant differences between the two descriptions, which is interesting to discuss. But right now I'd like to complete my survey. We've been discussing once and a half or twice Rabbi Golinkin's article about this, and I'd like to complete that first, and then start comparing a little bit to what Rav Lubitz brought, and we'll discuss that soon. The last thing that we saw was Rabbi Golinkin discussing all kinds of things not in the Masorti movement. Before there was a conservative Masorti movement, all kinds of halachot that were put in place, that they made changes and things like this, chidushim, and his position was this is the tradition of Judaism, and we just continue it. It's not, we are not a breakaway from tradition. Saying the extreme, I'm not saying this is the Orthodox position, but the position stated by the Khatam Sofer that we've mentioned, Chadash Asur min HaTorah, anything new is forbidden. That is a breakaway from the tradition of Judaism, and having a halachic board, halachic committee that makes decisions about things that sometimes deciding that something does need to be changed or have a new decision. That is the tradition of halakha. And he brought an example in Egypt where young men would perform weddings privately, and then, leave this woman that they married without a get. And so the rabbis of Egypt made a decree that anyone who did this, the whole kiddushin would be nullified. As it's called in halacha, mafki'im et kiddushin. They nullify the kiddushin. So this is an authority that is mentioned in the Talmud, but has not been exercised since then. And the rabbis in Egypt decided we can and should exercise this halachic option, because these men are taking advantage of these women and leaving them agunot and so on. And so they did. And then he quotes a rabbi from Egypt who writes about how the Torah is, on the one hand, doesn't change according to the spirits of whatever time it is, because this is an eternal Torah. And at the same time, it is so lofty, the Torah, that it is appropriate for all kinds of different times and places. And everyone has permission, not every individual, every Beit Din, proper authority, has the permission to add or to take off according to what is the right Torah, the right way to paskin halacha for their time. Welcome. And this is the last thing that we saw. And then we were going to get in, and I'm going to quote two lists that he makes. One is a list of the principles that guide the rabbis of the Masorti movement in making halachic decisions, and is going to bring a list of decisions that they've made. So first of all, the principles. He himself, Rabbi Golinkin, says there isn't a list of principles. There isn't the Beit Din or the Vad Halacha never put together an orderly and planned group of principles according to which they make their decisions. But if you go through a series of tens or hundreds of decisions that were made by rabbis or by the board, you can see that these are the guiding concepts or the guiding principles. And he says, number one is we make an effort to keep the tradition as much as possible. It's not that we get up in the morning, as we say in other situations, We get up in the morning and we just ask us, okay, what new halachic decision are we going to make today? We don't go out seeking to uproot and change all the halachot as much as we can, at least one a day. No, quite the contrary. We try to keep it as minimal as possible, keep the tradition as much as possible. Changes are only made when it's absolutely necessary to deal with an urgent and burning issue. That's number one. Interesting for me to note. On the one hand, I agree. On the other hand, I think we can be a bit more allowing, giving permission, not only if it's an absolutely urgent and burning issue. Sometimes it's right to bring about a certain change because it's going to pull things in the right direction. I think I've told this story in the past at a convention of the rabbis of Tzohar, the Tzohar rabbis. They had a group for the public, and they had a closed get together of the rabbis to discuss what do we do about all the new things that people are asking for, specifically women are asking for in Batei Knesset. So the general wind in that gathering was blowing in the direction, how do we put brakes on this process? And I spoke up and I said, if we don't lead it and grab the bull by the horns, right? That's the expression in English. Then it's going to go running wild. And if we lead it, it will be better than if we try to stop it and it's going to overrun us. Better that we take leadership here and move it forward through rabbinic guidance rather than have it blow up in our faces because we try to stop it and it's not going to stop. So, I don't know how popular that was at that specific gathering, but in any case, sometimes I think that it's necessary to take leadership and to help this move forward. Maybe I'll give another example of this soon relating to something else that Rabbi Golinkin said. On the other hand, I'm not sure that everything that the Masorti rabbis decided was indeed something burning and urgent, or maybe not necessarily, but we have to check that in a more specific way about specific decisions. Another point he makes is that there is always preference for being lenient. Always preference for being lenient. I would say I absolutely understand the need for leniency. I think there's room for leniency.
What's the matter?
I would not say always. Never say never, never say always. Sometimes it's important to be stringent. Sometimes it's important to uphold a certain halachic concept or demand and not be lenient about, even if it's not popular. Or there are all kinds of considerations, public and private and individual, for the kila, for the broader community, for individual people. I absolutely think that it has to be taken into consideration. Leniency has to be taken into consideration. It's an option. But I don't agree that it should always override. Wherever there's room to be lenient, be lenient. I think the attitude is saying, people, it's so difficult for people to keep halakha today. Just always be lenient. Let them keep, what's really necessary, and don't say forbidden when there's an opinion that says it's permissible. Just, only demand halachic framework where it's absolutely agreed upon by everyone, and there are no opinions that are more lenient. It may have to do with what community you work in and so on. He quotes a couple of sources about leniency, traditional halachic sources, and I think that he's exaggerating the meaning of what they're saying. Meaning those sources, for instance, the Meiri 700 years ago, or the Aruch HaShulchan, who lived 100 years ago, both of them are saying, don't run to be machmir. They're saying there are rabbis, the Aruch HaShulchan 100 years ago says, there are rabbis that any halachic question you bring before them, their immediate reaction is asur, forbidden. Now let's see if we can find a heter. And he says, no, that's not necessarily true. It's permissible. Now let's see if we find something that says it's forbidden. Okay, I understand that. But once you've studied the topic and you have the sources and you have opinions, they wouldn't say always be lenient. They would say always be careful. Don't say forbidden before you've checked all the sources and considered all the things that should be taken into consideration. And I think is exaggerating the meaning and taking it farther than what they meant. And I would add that I try some secrets, okay? Rabbi's secrets. You know that every Shabbat I say a halacha at the end of Musaf on Shabbat morning. First of all, I wanted to teach halacha and Kino David. And the time that you have the largest number of people, except for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is Shabbat at the end of Musaf. And we quote at the end of the tefillah, we quote, Kol hashoneh halachot muftach lo shehu ben ha'olam haba. Anyone who studies halacha will have the merit to be in the world to come, in olam haba. And I thought of an idea of, if we say that, let's study halachot. And I discovered that I'm not making up anything new, that this is a traditional thing with Sephardi rabbis. Since you say anyone who studies halacha has great merit, yalla, let's study some halachot. So I started doing it. And I can't give a halachic shir because then people will stop coming, if we make it a long halachic shir. But I can say one halacha every Shabbat. And people have said to me, it's not a good idea because some people, if they didn't know, at least they're what we call shogeg. They're unintentionally transgressing a certain halacha. Now, when you've told them the halacha, now when they don't keep it, they're mezid. They're intentionally not keeping a halacha. And I said, well, first of all, some people want to know the halacha and they keep it. They can't not teach halacha because there are some people that are not going to keep it. There are people who want to study this. Also, part of it is a message about Kino David. We're very welcoming. It doesn't mean that we don't care about halacha. We are welcoming towards people who don't keep halacha. That's not because we don't care about halacha. It's because we do care about people. We want Jews to be part of a community, not because we don't care about keeping or not keeping halacha. So these are messages. But also, I intentionally, and it's easy because Arav Melamed does this, and I use his books, and he's very good at this, Arav Melamed. He always brings the different opinions. There's a lenient opinion, there's a stringent opinion, there's a middle way. If there's a lenient and a stringent and a middle way, he generally takes the middle path. Generally, and I'm not saying always, but generally that's his attitude. But in any case, I try to teach that there are different opinions, some more lenient, some less lenient. And part of my intention is there are different people in shul. Some people want to hear the more stringent opinion. They want they want part of their worship of Hashem, part of the keeping of Torah. They want it to be performed by being stringent, by keeping halacha in a more demanding way, in a way that I have to make more of a sacrifice for it. Some people want to hear the lenient opinion because they're saying, even that's difficult for me. Let me leave it at that level. That's fine. So I intentionally mean it to have the different opinions. It's right for different people. And sometimes I think it's important that a person knows, if I only teach the stringent opinion, maybe he won't keep it. It's better that I teach the lenient opinion. Sometimes it's important that he knows that there's a stringent opinion, and yet he's also learned that there's a lenient opinion. So he makes his decision to be more lenient, but stay within halakha. And that's a very valuable religious decision to make. So it's important to bring the different opinions. But I don't think it's important always to be lenient, wherever it's necessary. I wouldn't agree that it goes that far. Okay? That's about that point. One or two more major points, one or two smaller points. We always check, says Rabbi Golinkin, we always check the status, the historical status of the halakha we're discussing. It makes a difference if it's from Torah law, rabbinic law, a minhag that was accepted by all, a minhag that was not accepted by all. I absolutely agree, we check what is the source. It's much more difficult to accept a change of something which is Torah law, of something which is an absolute clear rabbinic decision, or it's in it's a controversial rabbinic decision with different opinions and so on. If it's a minhag, it's much easier to say this was the minhag in the past. It doesn't have to stay this way forever. It's not part of what the Torah said is part of the eternal content of the Torah. I absolutely agree that this is significant, but he doesn't mention, and I think Rabbi Lubitsch does mention this, and this is why I say there's some lack of some discrepancy here, that the rabbinic board of the Vad Halacha does take the freedom to make decisions on anything, meaning they will be more careful about a Torah law than about a rabbinic law, but at the same time they do not limit themselves. They will also make a change if they think it's necessary about a Torah law, or if it's a rabbinic law of high authority or of lower authority, without getting into the details what that means. They don't limit themselves. Orthodox halachic decision-making, without saying nothing new is allowed, would say, Torah law, I don't have the authority. I can look for a loophole. I can look for make up a part-time temporary decision, or say pikuach nefesh, or I can broaden the concept of pikuach nefesh. I was just asked, during the war, I don't think this has anything to do with this discussion. It's just an interesting note. Parentheses. During the war, the Rabbanut of Tzahal, I think, has done a tremendous job. Terrific. I have not always thought that it's always terrific, but it has been changed in the last decade. And during the war, the rabbinic rabbi, the military rabbis have done a tremendous job. They're with the soldiers, including in Gaza. They are fighters themselves, or were fighters when they were younger. They've done tremendous work. One of the things they were very clear about was that if a soldier can leave on Shabbat to go home and come back after Shabbat, they allow him to go home. During the fighting, a soldier can get out for 12 hours. He can leave Shabbat morning and come back Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, or Sunday morning. Go home. Go drive on Shabbat. Go home. Sleep in your bed. Take a shower. Take a little break and come back, because you're going to be a better fighter. You're going to be fighting better. It's pikuach nefesh. Once you drove home and had a shower and slept in your bed and wore some clean clothing after 3 weeks and so on. Including if you have to leave on Friday, you're going to have to come back Shabbat morning. Same thing. Very clear about it. Absolute. No questions. Absolutely clear. I was asked this past Friday, by a soldier who was not in Gaza. His unit is in Gaza. He was outside of Gaza studying a new role that he had to take place. He was learning from the experience of others, understanding what it entails and so on. So he had to be there on Friday into Shabbat, and Shabbat morning he had to be back with his unit in Gaza. And he couldn't finish what he was trying to learn. He couldn't finish it before Shabbat because not everyone was there. Some of the people would only come back later. He had to be there Friday night. He had to be with his unit in Gaza Shabbat morning. They were not in active fighting. But I said to him, that is not a question. Of course, you stay Friday and study whatever it is you have to study. You go back to your unit Shabbat morning, you have to be there. No question. Because even if they're not in active fighting right now, that can erupt at any second. And he might be needed there, and he has to know his job better, and it's absolutely pikuach nefesh. That was one question. The answer was absolutely clear. But then he asked me another question. He's married. His wife is at her mother's in Petach Tikva. When he finishes his work Friday night, he can go to Petach Tikva, be there with his wife and her family, her mother, spend the night there, get up in the morning and go back to Gaza from Petach Tikva. Is he allowed to do that? Oh, I told him that you have to decide. I told him if it's a question, is it a question of pikuach nefesh? I said, if you will be a better soldier, will have better motivation, Shabbat morning, will you be more clear-headed because you took a break with your wife, with a home for Shabbat and not in the base for Shabbat, in civilian clothing and after a shower at home and whatever, and then on Shabbat morning you go back and you're going to be a better soldier, then yes, you can do it. If it's just for your comfort, and it doesn't make a difference to your abilities as a soldier, don't do it. He said to me, I think I might be a little bit subjective. I said, yes, but that's the decision. The decision is subjective. If you feel you're going to be a better soldier, then it's pikuach nefesh and do it. I don't know what he did. I left the decision for him. So, but this is a Torah law to drive on Shabbat and go there and go back. But this is not a real question. Close the parentheses. But in the same kind of thinking, sometimes a rabbi can have a little bit of flexibility in giving more weight to a different kind of consideration that would allow something even though it's forbidden by Torah law. So, you can there's a little bit of leeway. It's not all open, make whatever decision you want, and you don't always have the authority. And here we clearly differ in our opinions. We agree that you have to check the status of the question that is being asked, of the source, the halachic source that you think should or should not be changed now, the decision. But we don't agree on how much authority we have today to make these decisions, and we're much more restricted in that way. Another thing he says, I think, is not so new. He says that in contrast to what is common amongst many Orthodox rabbis, the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo, written in the 16th century in Tzfat, is a very important halachic book, but it is not an absolute authority. I agree 100%. I just don't think that it's unusual for an Orthodox rabbi to agree with that. I don't think it's so. I agree there are Orthodox rabbis who would speak this way, that Shulchan Aruch is a total is an absolute authority. But the facts are that everyone accepts the Shulchan Aruch as a very important authority. But so many decisions made by Shulchan Aruch have been argued and discussed and overridden throughout these past 400 or 500 years that you can't really claim that it's an absolute authority. It's absolutely an important authority. It is absolutely not an absolute authority. So I don't think there's anything new about that. He also says two more things that I agree with 500% and one kacha. Last 2 points, and then maybe we'll open for a little discussion. One point he makes, that there is room for halachic pluralism. Not everybody has to have the same decision. You don't have to give a decision that is right for everyone. You can say, for this community this way, for that community that way. It doesn't have to be one halacha for all. It's a sensitive issue because you don't want everybody doing their own thing, and you don't want every rabbi doing his own thing. You don't want all communities to be so different from one another that we lose the sense of being a Jewish community, a broader community that is fulfilling the Torah and keeping halacha. That's a very valuable thing. It is actually one of the values, one of the positive aspects of having halacha, of having commitment to halacha, because then we remain a nation keeping the Torah. If each one of us individuals does their own thing, if each one of us rabbis makes his own decisions, at the end of the day, or the year, or the decade, or the century, we will not be a nation keeping the Torah. We will be a lot of different diverse groups doing different things. We'll lose the experience of being a nation keeping the Torah. But there is room for halachic pluralism, having different decisions. It's the same idea as being stringent or lenient. Different rabbis having different opinions. And I would encourage that up to a point. And actually, when the Sanhedrin will be reinstituted, whatever.
Established.
Established, thank you. As I always say, I don't think right now, given my halachic Torah knowledge right now, I don't think I will be one of the 71 leading figures in the Sanhedrin, but I will try to be chosen. I will try to be a parliamentary aide of one of the Dayanim, and through him I will try to push in I absolutely, Sanhedrin should make some decisions about this framework that everybody has to abide by. But I expect Sanhedrin to leave also, not everything has to be the same for everyone. Some things have to be, everyone will accept. And some things can be left with a little bit of diversity between different communities. And I would agree with that, at least to a large extent. Last point, he says we put a lot of weight on the moral consideration, on the moral aspect of making a halachic decision. If there's a question of stringency, should I be stringent on a halacha, which is a Torah law between man and God, ben adam lamakom, or stringent on a moral aspect of something which is humanistic or considerate of other people, then the moral value will carry more weight. Again, I don't think this is a chidush. I don't think this is something that the Masorti movement brings into halacha. There's a famous quote of a rabbi, I think it was Reb Chaim Ibrisk, who at the time maybe of some kind of disease or something, plague, or whatever it was, or maybe it was an individual decision about someone told someone not to fast on Yom Kippur, and someone said to him, "What, you're lenient about Yom Kippur?" He said, "No, I'm stringent about Pikuach Nefesh." So it's sometimes there's a clash. There's a different considerations weighing in different decisions, and sometimes the moral aspect, the humanistic aspect, should override, not against the rules of halakha, but if there is room to go different ways, and one consideration goes one way, one consideration goes the other way, be stringent on the humanistic or moral aspect. I agree with this idea. I have to, we could disagree on one detail or another. That's reasonable disagreement. That's not disagreeing on the concept itself, on the principle itself. So if I look at this list, this compilation that Rabbi Golinkin put together of principles of how they make the halachic decisions, I would say there's a lot of overlap. There are a lot of things that I agree with. There are a lot of things I agree with, but might disagree with some, the fine tuning might be different. And there are 2 or 3 things where I think even though the basis of the concept is correct, the scope that it takes or the way that it's carried out is one of the places where our paths part in some very clear ways. So now let's take a break and have people speak up if you'd like to.
It sounds logical. It's good for everybody that people can feel free to feel comfortable with religion. I'm not sure that it's going to be that it's going to be comfortable for everybody. If you have, let's assume somebody. Okay, I'll give an example. If a Sfaradi marries an Ashkenaziya or the other way around, somebody takes somebody's minhagim, right?
Worthy of discussion, but let's say we go along with it.
Okay. So that's good. We go along with it. That's wonderful. I don't know, and it might take away from some of the minhagim that some people have. And is that good or not? I mean, I don't have a problem with it. If it's good for the family, it's wonderful. Then the children, who do they go with? The father, who's minhagim. Then they get married, and there might be a problem. Oh, they're Sfaradim, and these people. So what is the middle road? What do we do?
Okay. First of all, the general issue of minhagim and Sfaradi and Ashkenazi, I think that we are in a new occurrence, a new reality that never existed before in Am Yisrael. It's a reality of an amazing kibbutz galuyot.
Right.
And thank God we have mixed marriages. You know, there's the negative mixed marriage and the positive mixed
Right.
marriage. This is
Right.
the positive mixed marriages. So much so that it's a matter of you know, every day that goes by, we can, even if we really want to, our ability to be either Ashkenazi or Sfaradi or anything else is lessening every day. And my grandchildren, two of the families of my children are mixed marriages, 75% Ashkenazi, 25%, one is Moroccan, one is Persian. Grandchildren are 25, some of my grandchildren are 25% Persian or Moroccan. So when they get married, to somebody else who's 50% to this and 25% that, and another 25% something else, what are their children going to be? So that's going to happen on its own within, you know, every day it's happening that things are merging.
Yeah.
Then there's a question of along the way, do the two parents keep different minhagim? Does the family keep one minhag? I've always thought it's better for the family to have one minhag, although they can make decisions more lenient or more stringent. Some of my friends surprise me and say, no, it's very nice for the children to go up and see Ima does this, Abba does that, and they learn about Jewish history and different customs in different places, and then they can make their decisions. I'm not going to get into it. I'm just saying there are even different opinions about that. I'm talking about Orthodox friends, Orthodox rabbis. But then going back to what you were saying, okay, let's say they do have two different minhagim and now they can make decisions about it. Yeah. Should the decision be based on what's easier for them? I'm not sure, but is it a legitimate decision? I can't say it's not a legitimate decision. If it keeps them, if for them it's a way that enables them to feel that halakha is not too stringent and strengthen their connection and commitment to Torah and to halakha, then maybe it's better for them. And therefore, I sometimes might answer someone who's asking me a question, not only somebody who asked me about going to be with his wife on Friday and then go back to the army on Shabbat. That I think that totally depends on a subjective feeling of whether or not this is going to make you a better soldier the next day. But even when it's not as subjective as that, and I think that he should keep a more stringent opinion, but I would still think that it's important for him to make an independent decision, whether to be lenient or stringent, where there are different options. First of all, because maybe I am, you know, sometimes rabbis like to say, "Hamachmir tavo alav baracha," right? If you're more stringent, you will be blessed because you're trying harder, you're more sure that you're keeping within the framework of halacha. And I would be careful with that sentence because sometimes it's true, but sometimes you're causing this person to go farther than what he's capable of, and he's just gonna move farther away rather than closer in. So he has to have that ability to have that freedom. And also I think there's value to telling a person, not only the rabbi makes decisions. Yes, ask a rabbi, study with the rabbi. He knows, you know, what the options are, where what the framework is, and there can be, like I said before, diversity within the halachic framework. But it's also valuable that a person makes his own decisions and his acceptance of the yoke of the Torah. So if I can tell a person there's a lenient opinion and a stringent opinion, beyond these subjective reasons that each person might be different, just the fact that he's going to have to take responsibility and decide has a value of taking responsibility for your Judaism. And I believe that makes his Judaism more powerful within his soul. Even if he makes the decision to be lenient, he's making the decision, he's taking responsibility about his Judaism. I think that's also valuable. So all the, you know, how do you weigh these different considerations? There's no what's the word I'm always missing? There's no what? No, medical formula. Formula, that's the word. There's no formula exactly how to make those decisions.
But I also think that the fact that there's so many couples are now from mixed backgrounds, I think that they kind of make up their own tradition. That
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, actually,
No, I
because
don't. I think it's nice. You see that some
no, I'm saying this because there are opinions that, they have to go by the husband and things like that. And I think that that depends on where you're living. If you moved into a Sephardi or Ashkenazi community because you moved into your husband's community,
right.
then keep those minagim. But if you move to your wife's community, it would be the same. But the community that we live in is a community of mixed minagim. So,
But it's also, I think, times have changed, and women feel stronger. And why should she take on the minhag of her husband? Why?
that's
So why?
one way of looking at it. And what I'm saying is, besides that aspect, which I can accept is also a valuable aspect,
Right,
the idea that we go by the husband was not based on he's more important or he's higher in hierarchy in the family. It was based on the fact, the social acceptance, the
right,
socially accepted thing that when you got married, the woman moved to the husband's
right,
family where they
right,
lived.
right.
And therefore she accepted the minagim because that's where she moved to
Yes,
that community.
but
But even at that time, if he would move to her community
right,
because her father is a rich Yid and he's going to work with her father, then he would have to accept those minagim because that's where he moved to.
sounds fair.
Speak up.
Netael.
Yeah, so I'm from a mixed marriage, and
Well,
so and I'm also married with. So my wife is 100% Tunisian and so Sephardi, and I'm Chetzi Sephardi, Chetzi Ashkenazi, and I find that it's very rich, and I really like, and also for our children, it's very rich to have both minagim and everything that we have all together, and just not to stay focused on only one community. And this is also what makes all the Am Yisrael very rich here because we have a lot of people from everywhere, from all around the world, and it's very rich to know and to share and to mix all these this minagim. So I think maybe in few decades and few generations, it won't be important to be Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, whatever. The most important is that we are Jewish for me, and that we can share and we are open to the other and to accept the other. And it's very, as you talk, Rafti, for me it's more important to be to take care about the other one, even if there are difference. And sometimes it's more important to accept the other with their difference, with the different minagim, instead of staying stuck in one minag and rejecting the other and put them on the side because they are Sephardi or Ashkenazi or whatever.
The only thing I think we should be worried about is that we're going to lose the diversity because we're all living here together. Chas v'chalila, we'll all be the same, basof. So I guess we don't have to worry about that. Well, with Jews, every Jew having at least 2 or 3 different opinions within himself, I think we'll be okay. Eta.
Well, the issue I'm definitely not a soldier, but I'm a volunteer with Hatzalah, and about a year and a half ago, I'm a chosen, a psychological. So a year and a half ago, the Rabbanut of the Hatzalah decided that we can carry on Shabbat our phones in case we're needed. It bothered a bunch of us and everything in our group. And it's still, I'm always freaking out that it's going to go off or something, but they did decide that we would have it. And on October 7th, it was very good that we had it, that we got to get called out and everything. But it's still hard, especially when you're around other people. It's almost like you want to wear a sign that goes, it's okay if my phone vibrates today, because it's hard to explain to people and everything, when you're hiding it and everything.
Right.
So.
We had an experience in shul. We had a guest who is a social worker, And so in his work, in his line of work, they have a how do you say, a toranut,
Yeah, yeah. It's
what's the word
rounds,
in English?
like,
They have,
it's their time to work.
You're on mute, Ilana.
Yeah.
But they
A
have
rotation, a
a
total.
rotation,
Yeah.
thank you. They have a rotation. There always has to be someone who's available, including on
Right.
Shabbat, for people who have a very acute need to talk to someone.
right.
And it was his turn to be
Mhm.
that person who's the emergency social worker. He was in shul at Kino David, and his phone was off, but he could get the get the vibration that someone's looking for him. And in the middle of davening, he had to answer his phone, and he walked out, and someone kind of ridiculed it. And here's a guy who's not so serious, and he was in our shul, ha ha ha, and he happened to be our guest, and he told us at home, I heard the guys behind me, laughing about it or whatever. And actually, Osher was very upset about it. And the next Shabbat in shul was insistent that we teach the halacha, that there are people who have their phone with them because of issues of pikuach nefesh. And when you see someone, always assume that that's why this is what happened. That is what happened the Shabbat before. And that was interesting, the kind of experience. And by the way, you mentioned October 7th. I always bring my phone to shul with me. I come on Friday with a car. My cell phone is in shul. Off, it's off. But once at least we needed it. Someone fell and was hurt, and we took out the phone and we called an ambulance on Shabbat, and we needed to have the phone there. So I always have my phone with me. But on October 7th, it was more than that. I decided that I have to leave the phone open, and I told everyone, go home and turn on something or other, electronic device, computer, phone, something. You have to get the news. You have to know what's going on, what you have to do. That was one thing. But the other thing was we for Kino David rushed through the Simchat Torah davening, and we were done by 10:30, 11, whatever it was, and we dispersed. And actually, we met someone on the way home who had not heard any news when I was on her way to shul, and we broke the news to her. But also, we have a relative in Ra'anana who is a person who has gone through, she's been abused and has a lot of trauma and all kinds of, psychiatric needs because of this. I mean, the person who abused her, we always say he doesn't know, he might even not be aware of how much he's a murderer, but he really, really damaged her soul. And we're in touch with her. And sometimes she comes to us. And Osho said to me on that Simchat Torah, it was Shabbat, she said to me, call her. Make sure she knows me. I had a phone. Osho didn't have her phone with her. I had my phone with me. And I called her, and she was in shock. She gets a phone call from me on Shabbat. She doesn't keep Shabbat. But she got a phone. She grew up in a religious family. Part of her trauma is she's not religious today. It was a religious person who abused her. It's very difficult for her to be religious. But she comes to us. She enjoys spending, a Friday night meal with us and so on. But she was shocked. She got a call from me on Shabbat. But we called to make sure that she's okay, that she knows what's going on, that she's, do you have to come to us? If you want to come to us, come to our house or whatever it is. And, sometimes that's what you need to do. That's the right thing to do.
It's very important. You're right. It's very important.
Mark.
When you're talking about leniency, it seems to me that you're talking on two levels. One is the general level, the rules that you make, and the decisions you make for a large number of people, maybe the Keilah, maybe more generally. And there's another level on which you make recommendations or decisions for an individual. And when you make a recommendation for the individual, you can consider, what is that person's motivation, what characteristics the person, and you can make things very differently, I would think, than when you're making a general decision. So I think there are two levels on which you have to deal with leniency or stringency as well.
Absolutely. There is room for comparison because sometimes you look at like I said before, you look at the community and you can make a different decision for different communities. And sometimes for one community to be stringent can be detrimental, and for some communities to be lenient can be detrimental. You have
Right.
to be aware of that. Like you say, you have to know the person, you have to know the community. I think it's very wrong that sometimes someone goes to a different rabbinic figure and tells them, listen, I heard this rabbi said so-and-so. Is it right? And he says, no, it's wrong. Or in this community, they do something. He doesn't know the community, has no idea what it's about, who the
Right.
people are who come there, and he has criticism of it. You know, it's in halacha, that's considered for a dayan, for a judge. You can't make judgment without checking out the facts. You can't, hear one side and say it's wrong. Wait a minute. You have to get to know the person and the community. But also at the end of the day, we have to draw a line and make a decision. And, I don't have to spend 10 years with this person before I can make a decision and so on. But yes, you're absolutely right. There can be a difference between the community and an individual. And sometimes you have to go through the discussion with the community and make a decision and have a. Of course, you can have a more detailed and diverse discussion with the individual because it's about him. It's about him individually, so it can be a different discussion, and inevitably it possibly could lead to a different decision. Okay.
You see, oh, sorry.
Side also about the soldier issue. So the soldier is driving home on Shabbat. Is the soldier wearing his kippah?
I absolutely think he should.
So a person sees this, like the person answering the phone sees this. This is
When
wow.
our oldest grandson was born on Motzei Shabbat, but they drove to the hospital on Shabbat. They left Shabbat morning or afternoon, I think Shabbat afternoon, to drive to the hospital. And he said he was wearing Shabbat clothes, a white kippah. And he said on the way, they went to Bnei Brak, to Ma'aneh Yeshua. And he said on the way, someone driving next to him was kind of making all kinds of, what's going on? You have a kippah on. How are you driving on Shabbat? And how do you sign language back to him? My wife is pregnant, I would expect,
Just like that.
I would expect that if you see someone with a kippah driving on Shabbat, you make one of two assumptions. Either he's traditional, he went to shul, he's driving home, or
It's an
he's
emergency.
going to the hospital, it's not, but I guess not everybody gets it. But yes, on the other hand, it's important to show that, yes, this is part of Torah. And someone who doesn't know that, it would be very important for them to know that. By the way, the other births were in Meir. All my daughters and daughters-in-law have been very happy with Meir, just for if any of you need to know for your daughters, granddaughters, or whatever. But there is one advantage to Bnei Brak and to I know this is true also in Yerushalayim at Shari Tzedek. Once you get there, there's a non-Jewish worker at the entrance who takes the car from you, parks it, and brings the keys to the reception. So on Motzei Shabbat, you can come get your keys, find out where the car is. Because this is also a halachic question. Once you're there, you're at the hospital,
What do you
get
do?
out of your car, leave it.
Driving in.
So we'll discuss a different time what to do if you don't have a non-Jewish person there to take care of it for you. But at these religious hospitals, there's someone there to take care of it when someone gets there on Shabbat.
That's good.
Yeah.
So
Michael.
quickly, what I was going to say is, I believe that we are required to think the best of people. And if you've got an alternate explanation for something that looks a little off, you should take the one that puts that person in the best light. So I think that's the answer to seeing somebody driving with a kippah on Shabbat.
Yeah, just raising grandchildren. We have grandchildren growing up in Ra'anana in another town, and we have grandchildren growing up in a Yishuv Dati. And one of our granddaughters growing up in Yeshuv Dati was here for a Shabbat, and walking home from shul, someone passed by us talking on his phone. And she had such difficulty with that. She said to us, why is he talking on his phone? And our honest answer is he doesn't keep Shabbat. But why not? And then, but why don't you explain to him? It was, you have to, growing up in a Yeshuv Dati, at some point you have to grow up and get out of that.
Yeah.
How do you say it in English? How do you pronounce it? Naivete or something? Naivete.
Yeah. So, I've said for many, many years that in today's world, if you're an observant Jew, you're doing it by choice.
Oh, yeah.
There are certainly people that are raised that way from birth, and it's not even a question that they're going to live that way and behave that way. But for many, many other people, whether they grow into it or there's so many attractions to take away from it today, everybody has to choose how they're going to behave. So I was interested in the early part of the discussion where it seemed like you were suggesting that the halacha should be tailored to what community you're in, but then you did get to the point where you're talking about, it really is an individual thing as well, to the individual. Obviously not 100%, it's not a free-for-all.
Right.
But I didn't know that when our grandkids get married, we're going to have a calculator to figure.
Put it this way, as you said, they are going to make their independent, free decisions,
Yes.
including whatever your calculator is going to tell you. They're going to make decisions about their minhagim. So don't worry about it.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I would just add a little, personal note. When I gave birth to my daughter, of course it was a Friday night when I went into labor. Oh, everybody has a story like that, it seems. And we had to get to the Boston Lying In, and I originally said to my husband then, well, maybe we should take a cab, and he said, no, I know what I'm doing, and I'm watching him, and he made a wrong turn, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's an issue, you go into labor on a Friday night in a big city, and you eventually get to the the hospital that's going to deliver, but
You have to travel on Shabbat. You have to travel on Shabbat. My son was born on Shabbat.
Yeah.
of course.
My
But
son
it was still,
traveled
it was-
on Shabbat.
One hand or something, use a different hand. They used to
so
say that
many
if you had to
people have
call, you
stories like
use
that, but
your right hand, you use your left hand to make the phone call. or
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
Out of the car, you
Yeah.
do whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, those are options.
Yes.
It depends on the situation. If you have to get going, don't ask any questions, just get going.
Yep.
If you have time to think of options, a cab.
That's exactly.
I've had in the group of there are a couple of rabbi groups in Ra'anana even, and recently one of the rabbis was asking for phone numbers for non-Jewish cab drivers in advance. Maybe because they had someone who's about to give birth, and just in case they'll have his number.
Yep. That's good.
All kinds of reasons. And I remember once we ended up not giving birth, we ended up with one of our daughters being dehydrated or whatever, and went to the hospital Friday afternoon, just enough time for me to get home and come back with some things and so on, and leave the car there. But they let us out at 10 o'clock at night. And I was not going to ask her to start walking home from Mayor. It was from Mayor. I could walk home, but I was not going to ask her to start walking home. But first we waited outside, a taxi came. What did I ask him?
If he was Jewish.
Are you Jewish? He said, yes. He understood exactly what I was saying. He said, do you want me to call a non-Jewish driver for you? I said, no, it's okay. I don't want you making your phone call on Shabbat. But the second taxi that came by was not Jewish.
Good.
And he was willing that I would pay him after Shabbat. And he took her home. I walked. He took her home. He knows where I live. He can come. He didn't come. I went looking for him on Sunday to remember what taxi company he was from, to find him and pay him for his work.
That's
But,
good. You found him? You found him.
I found him. Yeah.
But if you're willing
That's
to
beautiful.
let your daughter take a taxi, why not with a Jewish taxi driver?
Because
I
it
mean,
was,
they'll be doing pickup.
because it's, if I were to make decisions in that situation, I would have her stay in the hospital. The only reason she couldn't do that is because, not because of Pikuach Nefesh, because of Shabbat. She couldn't do that because the hospital's policy is you don't need medical care anymore. They gave her intravenous, they gave her what she needed. You're okay now, go rest at home. You don't need to be under supervision. You don't need any more medical care. Go home.
Mhm.
We need the bed. Get out of here. They threw us out. They weren't worrying about her. They were. I don't think it was a pikuach nefesh for the next person who came in either. They had enough beds in the hospital, but this is their policy. I'm not going to start fighting with them about it. So we had to go home, and her situation was, and it's not Chilul Shabbat for her to ride in the taxi. So she needs this. For her to start walking home now, that could be pikuach.
That would be, yeah, yeah.
But for her
That's what
to,
I meant. That's what I meant.
yeah, but she could stay in the hospital. I don't need someone Jewish to drive her home now. That's not pikuach nefesh. If, again, if it was get her there as fast as possible, I wouldn't ask any, I would drive myself. But I had the car there, I could drive her home. But I don't think that was necessary at that point. And the fact is that the second guy who came by was not Jewish, and I could send her home in a taxi, and it was okay. So I don't think it was necessary to. There are all kinds of halachot about this. For instance, that if I went out, if I drove somewhere on Shabbat for a pikuach nefesh, it depends on the circumstances how, and then the pikuach nefesh ended. Am I allowed to return or not? And what they do in Israel, in all the hospitals, for nurses and doctors, they have rotation. Still looking for another word. They have toranut on Shabbat, and of course they can go, but they have Arab drivers who take them home after their
Right.
shift. After their shift, they have non-Jewish drivers who take them home.
Yeah.
But I've had someone ask me, it's much more difficult. You have to wait for the driver. It takes much longer. You get home much later. Am I allowed to drive myself home? And questions like this. So it depends. There's room for discussion. But since the situation was not acute, it's a one-time thing. It's not something ongoing that we're going to be going through every Shabbat. So I thought it was right at that situation to have her go home not with a Jewish driver.
Rabbi, I have a medical opinion for you.
Yeah.
About your daughter having to leave the hospital when maybe she didn't want to. In my practice here, as I told people many times, if you don't need to be in the hospital medically, it becomes the most dangerous, most expensive, least
stay in the
comfortable hotel in town. You don't want to be there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a
Okay,
good way to put it.
very good. Okay, so the next stage for sometime after the Chagim is a list of examples that Rabbi Golinkin gives of decisions that they made, but I am going to compare that to a more extensive list that Rabbi Lubitz brought from his study, and I'm going to have a question about what Rabbi Golinkin presented. If maybe we should approach him and ask him personally, but for now, let's look at his list and another list and discuss it. And maybe later on we can actually ask him why this was his list, because I would think there are some other things that he should have mentioned. But in any case, he knows more about his opinion than I do.
When is the next class going to be, in fact?
I don't know, because I think the first one, I think there won't be another one before the Chagim. Meaning the first one after the Chagim will be Hebrew, and then the next one in English will be a week and a half after.
Got that.
It'll be next year sometime.
Yes. Okay.
You will let us know.
Yes.
Goodbye. Good night.
Yishal
Thank
Koach.
Tova,
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you so much. Bye
Shana
bye.
Tova. Good year for all of Am Yisrael.
Shana Tova.
you. Same to everybody.